Welcome back to In the Driver's Seat. I'm Lisa French. I'm a former race car driver turned empowerment coach. This podcast is all about exploring mindset, beliefs, and the intention of creating the life that you truly love. That I will be sharing personal stories in these intro episodes about things that I've been through in my past, and not because I believe the past defines me, but the things that how I got through them through resiliency and just self-discovery, the lessons I learned, those things do define me. And I just hope that telling my own story inspires you to take the wheel in your own life in a so to speak manner and inspire you to make meaningful change for yourself. In the last episode, I talked about how I discovered a family secret, and the family secret was me. This episode is going to be a little more lighthearted, but it's going to be how I blossomed into the person I am. And that was through racing. And believe it or not, if you did not know me way back when, I used to be very shy, like really shy, quiet, keep to myself, shy. I mean, I can be a little introverted at times, but mostly I'm very comfortable in a crowd or comfortable talking to people. Always doing this podcast. So how racing came to be in my life was that my dad had he raced what they call sprint cars in his hometown, Lincoln, Illinois. And then he got back into it after my mom and dad divorced. So he actually was at the first World Outlaw race in Texas in 1978. But it wasn't long after that when he nearly died in a sprint car. And that was, I'm from Southeast Iowa, and he was actually for the first time was racing at a track just an hour north of us at Cedar Rapids called Hawkeye Downs. And at the time, Hawkeye Downs was dirt. And he always took my brother and I to the track, but this particular night, for whatever reason, he got a babysitter for us to stay home. And he was running late. He gets to the track. He's missing qualifying. He's just about ready to miss qualifying. So he's hurrying up, getting himself in the car. He doesn't use all of his safety equipment. But while he was sitting in the car, he heard that the track record had been broken that night. And it had been like several years that it took several years for the track record to be broken. And so he, in his mind, was thinking, it's not going to last X amount of minutes, that he was going to break the record. So he goes out on the track, and the first lap, he apparently was very close to also breaking the record. In the second, but the sprint car, this was before they had the wings on the sprint cars. And so he was going through the turns on bicycling, and he hits a rut, which sends his car flipping, and he hits the wall. His helmet hit the side of the wall. His helmet hit the roll cage. His arm went up over the roll cage, and the car crushed his arm. He was sent to University of Iowa Hospital, which was only like a half hour away. There, they wanted to amputate his arm, but he was in a coma. My parents, like I said, were divorced. So the next of kin to get permission to amputate was his parents, and my grandparents were on vacation at the time. So they could not reach someone to get permission. So they did their best to save his arm. And what they did was they put steel plates in. So from his elbow to his wrist. He had steel plates. And they told him that he basically would not have any use of his arm, that it was just going to basically just be there. But he did get, the only thing he couldn't do was use his wrist, because there was no wrist. It was just, he had to turn his whole arm instead of being able to turn it with his hand. He did end up with permanent double vision. They did try several operations to correct that, but they just kind of got it to the best they could. So I loved racing, but I didn't want anyone I loved to race, because I was in kindergarten when my dad nearly died. It was pretty traumatic, and watching him, just kind of the shape he was in after he got out of the hospital and all the care that people had to give him. It was a lot. But my brother, who is 2 years younger than me, when he was 8, started racing go-karts. And go-karts, like, it was, Brett car at least had a roll cage and seat belts and all that, but there's no roll cage, there's no seat belts. And I would get physically ill going to the track to watch him race. But my dad insisted I had to go and support him. And it was just about kind of getting used to it a little bit when my brother ended up flipping his kart. They had a tire in the track. There had been, like, I think rain or something, but for whatever reason, there was water, like, in the inside corner. And so they put a tire out there, and I don't know if somebody bumped him or what happened, but he hit the tire and it sent him, like, straight up, like 10 feet up or so, or it looked like a really long ways. And I remember I stood up and started screaming. But he was really smart in the fact that he pushed himself away from the cart. So while he's in the air, he kind of just knew enough to, I don't know how, to get himself away from it. So when he landed flat on his back, and the cart landed next to him. And all these carts behind him, because he was running second at the time, all these carts are coming around and they're missing him, and thankfully. So that kind of shook our dad up a little bit. In his hometown in Lincoln, Illinois, there's a quarter midget track. And so a lot of my dad's friends who also raced or whatever, they were like, well, why don't you put your kid in a quarter midget, because they're so much safer. So that's what happened. We ended up in quarter midget racing. In quarter midget racing, I really don't know back then. This had been like in 83 when I first started going to the track, that what the percentages were, but a lot of girls race quarter midgets. And I would say probably maybe 35 to 40% were girls, maybe not quite that high, but it felt like a lot. There were a lot of girls that raced. And we also started racing so we go every weekend to there, and then we would go to on every other Sunday. There was a track in Cedar Falls, Iowa, an asphalt track, and we would go there. Well, they had what they called a club car that was strictly they used to get people, like maybe visitors or whatever, who might be interested in racing, to let them try it out. So everybody just kept asking me, why don't you race? Why don't you race? I'm like, no interest. And somehow they ended up talking me into at least just trying the club car. And I won my first 6 races. So my dad's getting a quarter midget, and it just went from there. I learned how to work on my own car. My dad was really great at, kind of teaching me the basic tools and letting me do different, like the maintenance and changing tires and the gear and whatever. It wasn't like anything high tech by any means, but pretty cool. Because I started racing in 83. I was 11 when I started racing quarter midgets. He found out like the car that I was racing, I was doing really bad. I was spinning out a lot. We were in Kokomo, Indiana, and on the asphalt track, which wasn't our thing. Our home track was that we raced in Lincoln, Illinois, was dirt, and that's what I was used to. And we're in Kokomo at a nationals there, and I kept spinning out. My dad's like, "What is wrong?" I'm like, "I don't know." I didn't know how to tell him what was wrong with the car, how to make it go, like why I was spinning out. So he put my brother in it. My brother's like, "I don't know how she drives this thing. That's terrible." So he ends up buying me a new car, and the builder was in California, Ken Rice, and we flew out there. It was like going to driving school, where Ken Rice every night we're watching film, he's drawing on chalkboards, like race lines and techniques and starting the race and all this stuff. Then we were supposed to go race in Sacramento, and we get there and there's nobody there. So he's like, I guess it's practice day. And I'm just running laps. And I'm not doing very well because I was still very shy. Like I didn't have a lot of, I just didn't have a lot of confidence. Probably also still a little bit of the timidness from my dad racing, like just kind of a little bit of fear with it. And Ken was just really on me. And I go to the car and I'm sitting in the car, like crying. My dad found me. He comes sit in the car with me and he said, "Are you okay? Do you want me to say something to him? I'll make it stop." And I said, "No." So I just, from that moment on, I came out and I'm like, dang it, I'm going to freaking do this. And I started getting much faster. Ken was super happy. We go back, our car gets shipped back to home. We go to some big races after that. I was doing really well. Had some other like mechanical issues that took me out, but overall, that season I was doing I won a lot of races and so that was fun. That was a lot of fun. And it even got me where another family, a guy that owned another car asked me to drive what they call a half midget. So we were driving quarter midgets, and there's all these different engine classes. And then there's a half midget, which at our particular track, the only class we have were the 125 cc engines, where which is a 2-cycle, but a lot of the other quarter midget tracks, the half midget class were 4 cycles. So that was a little different. But he asked me to race his car. So my dad bought the motor. I raced. And I remember thinking, because his daughter she was done racing and she was really good, like really good. And I remember feeling hesitant because I thought if I don't do as well as she did, that everyone will compare me to her and they will say, yeah, she's not as good as Tracy, blah, blah, blah. And when I told my dad that I was hesitant in taking up the offer, he told Jim, and Jim came back and said, "You tell her if I didn't think she could do as well as Tracy did, I wouldn't have asked her." So that was just, I think, having those moments of people in your life that take the time to see, or they see your potential, was really pivotal for me in stepping into my own self-confidence and power, stepping out of my shell, whatever you want to call it. It was really, really helped me a lot and boosted my confidence. So at that point in life, now I'm kind of ending. So you can only race quarter midgets till you're 15. You race half midgets and I don't remember what the age brackets are there, but I could have raced half midgets for a long time. So, but I didn't want to. And I told my dad, I said, I want to focus on school. I want to get ready for college. I do not want to move up to full midgets, which are 4-cylinder, much bigger cars, bigger wheelbase, bigger tracks, much faster, adults driving that, racing them. And I said, I'm not interested in doing that. And my dad ends up buying a older midget. I think it was a kind of a self-built, like somebody built it themselves. And I was mad. I was so mad. He just bought it and thought he could talk me into racing it. So I was 16 and my brother was 14, and he was like, oh, well, we'll just put Kenny in it. Well, at that point in time, you had to be 16 to drive the midgets. And they just started showing up to the track and racing and got away with it for a little while. But then there was a family that knew us from quarter midget racing, and they're like, he's not old enough to race. So my dad now comes back to me and said, Lisa, will you please try it? So kind of like the quarter midget. Will you please try? If you don't like it, he goes, I'll sell it. He said, but I got this car for, whatever. So yeah. And I tried it. I raced the end of the season, just a couple local, like not very far from where I grew up. There were some in Eastern Iowa races, and then he's buying a new car for me, and my brother moves on to sprint cars. He was racing those. And what was kind of really crazy is that also back then, USAC, which was a sanctioning body for a lot of different racing groups, they were very strict about you had to be 18 to race with USAC. And back then, their stance on it was that you had to be a legal adult to sign the reason why it was 18 was because they wanted you to be a legal adult when you signed the pit waiver. So that it released them a liability of you being in the pits or on the track or whatever. So my dad's workaround was to have me emancipated. So I was emancipated and full legal adult at the age of 16 so I could race with USAC. Now, I didn't race with them full time. I only think I raced a handful, like maybe only a couple of races with them. But that's how serious racing was for my dad. So in 1989, I raced with MARA, Midwest Auto Racing Association. And they went from track to track. There wasn't one single track they raced at. I ended up getting Rookie of the Year that year. And then I went off to college. Well, the next year, I guess, would have been the year that I graduated. In 90, I graduated. And then I went off to college. But basically, I wasn't racing. The car was sitting. My brother, like I said, was racing sprint cars. They were at Knoxville Raceway all the time, which is the premier racetrack for sprint cars in Iowa. And I remember just thinking, well, this is silly. Like, my car's just sitting here because there was no tracks in Iowa really that raced or anywhere close to us that raced midgets. So I told my dad to put a sprint car together for me, and he about died. But you're sure he did not ever expect those words to come out of my mouth. But so my brother raced a 410 cubic engine class, and I wanted to race the 360. And so they started putting a car together. Back then, the 360 class had a smaller wing, they had to run a hard tire, and we were close to the car being completed. I mean, the wing was painted even. And my dad came to me and said, Lisa, you're not going to race the 360 class. If you want to race sprint cars, you're going to race a 410. And I just looked at him like, I remember just this pit in my stomach of like, what? And he said, here's why. If you're going to learn to race sprint car, you're going to learn to race it properly, because the small wing and the hard tire is going to create bad racing like different. You have to race the car differently than with a 410 with the big wing and in a softer tire compound. He said, and so if you're going to race it, you're going to learn to race it. That you're going to run in the 410 and learn to drive it that way. And so that's what I did in my very first sprint car race. Was at Knoxville Raceway, a half-mile track with the World of Outlaws, which is the best of the best at the time in the sprint car world. They were a racing circuit. They are a racing circuit that goes around, travels all over the country. And I'll never forget when Steve Kinzer passed me, went by me, and I felt like I was literally just sitting still on the track. And he was like, wow. Like, what am I doing? And people just thought, to my dad, he was crazy. Like, you were going to kill your daughter. But that was really, I think, the essence of my dad is this: well, if you want to do it, just do it. There was no, like, you can't do that. You're a girl, or you're not ready, or whatever. It was just like, let's do it. And so those were had a lot of impact for me in racing in my life. So to this day, besides just learning how to be more self-confident and also having mentors, I had a mentor at the track when my first year racing sprint cars, Hank Smith. For those of you who know, Randy Smith's dad, he would just come over and he would take me to the corners in the track and show me race lines and show me what cars were doing. And then another father of a driver with the World Outlaws, actually, Craig Keel's dad, the Keels would use our shop when they would come through Knoxville, and he would encourage me and just say, you're such a smooth driver. And so just having those people encourage me by the time I moved up to midgets and sprint cars, like I said, when I started in quarter midgets, you were just a kid racing. It wasn't like, oh, a female, you're a girl and racing with the boys. But by the time I moved up to midgets, and for sure by the time I was in a sprint car, I'm getting looks, because back then, this is, in 89 when I raced midgets, and 92 and 93 when I raced sprint cars, it was very unusual for a female to be racing in those levels. So you get looked at like, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. I was even told by a World of Outlaw official one time to watch out, because I think a female driver had taken out one of the World Outlaw drivers at a track before, like recently at that point. And so there were people that make you feel like you're just going to be in the way. You're not, what are you doing? But then they had this really special people who would encourage you and take the time to mentor you, or me. And I really appreciate that. So I try to do that. I try to do that in going forward in other aspects of my life. I try to see where people maybe aren't feeling as confident in something and encourage them. So that's really it on that story of racing. I don't, other than that, I don't really stay connected. I became a race fan for many years. I'd go to the track and watch, but that's really difficult. I remember one of my friends always gave me a hard time, and she's like, you're not a race fan. And I said, you're right, I'm not. It's a really hard transition to go from being behind the wheel, where it's a much different adrenaline rush, to be behind the wheel to sitting in the stands and watching the races. But I loved my friends. I loved the social aspect of it. But overall, I don't really stay too connected to it, even though I really enjoy it. But my son's racing, and so he's a third generation driver, and I get joy in staying connected through him in that way. But overall, racing is my past, but it is a huge part of who I am, for sure. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And then please subscribe, leave me a message, follow, wherever you're watching this. If you enjoyed the stories I'm sharing and you don't want to miss one, hit the subscribe button. So on the next episode, I will talk about losing my parents and how that impacted my life, navigating adulthood without their guidance. So until then, thank you. I love you.